For we contend not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this present darkness, against the spiritual host of wickedness in the heavenly places. From the American Midwest comes This Present Darkness, where we explore the supernatural aspects of the paranormal from a Catholic perspective and expose the dark forces in our world and beyond, both seen and unseen. Now, here's your host, historian, paranormal investigator, author, and ghost lorist, Ursula Bielski.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. For those of you who don't know me and are new here, my name is Ursula Bielski, and I am a paranormal investigator, historian, folklorist, author, and a lifelong Catholic. And on this show, we look at everything in the world of the supernatural from a Catholic perspective. Today, we're going to talk about what probably a lot of you are going to think is a very bogus opinion that I hold about something that's very dear to a lot of paranormal investigators, and that is electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP. EVP is one of a number of types of phenomena or ways of methods of research under the umbrella of something called instrumental transcommunication, or ITC. And it's basically, ITC is using electronic devices to try and speak to what we call the voices of unknown origin, which most people believe are the voices of the deceased. And so you can use tape recorders, digital recorders. You can use, a lot of people try to communicate with through messaging on their computer hard drives or emails, text messages, staticky TV screens, and things like that. So anything that you can use as a medium, which we'll talk about, to facilitate communication between the living and the dead. That's basically what it is. And EVP is by far the most popular kind of subcategory of ITC, where you try to use recorders or what we call ghost boxes or ghost radios or spirit boxes to have oftentimes real-time two-way conversations with the deceased, or at least have conversations that are playback later. And I'll get into all of this. As we have kind of a new audience now, because as a lot of you on YouTube probably don't know, I got back on Facebook about 2 weeks ago. I was off of Facebook for about 4 years, and it was a very, very healing time, as you can imagine. And it was also a time of a great productivity and change in my life. And I'm writing a lot about this in my memoir that's coming out next month, called Shadows of My Former Self. If you want to read some of the teasers on that, if you want to read some of the information chapters in advance, you can join me on Patreon, because I'm going to be posting over the next month some of the chapters from that book before it's published. A lot of it is very juicy. So I do talk about a lot of things that have happened to me, and things I brought on myself as well. So yeah, a little juicy, but as the audience here is different this week, because I had a lot of friends, old friends from the paranormal world, come over and join us here on YouTube this week. And for those of you who are just joining me from my old paranormal life and from Facebook, the audience that we have here, over 4,000 wonderful viewers now, is the great majority is our evangelical Christians. And there's a reason for that, which you can figure out when you watch the other former videos. But the people that are coming over now from my old paranormal world, I would say the great majority of those are from a Catholic background. And I was very interested this week when I wrote this week's blog post, which is about EVP in the Catholic Church, that the majority of EVP practitioners in the United States were raised Catholic. They may not be Catholic now, but they were raised Catholic. So I found that interesting, and it really gelled with the article that I was writing that I'm going to talk to you about today. So we have a new mix of people on here. We have a lot of evangelical Christians who always knew that talking to the dead is a really bad idea. And then we have a lot of Catholics and other Christians from the paranormal world that absolutely love EVP and think, as I did, that it's part of science and it's helpful and it's a good thing to do. And I'm going to talk today not only about the history of EVP with the Catholic Church, but also why it's not a good idea to talk to the dead under any circumstances. So the reason I started writing this blog post this week, I wasn't intending to write about the Catholic Church and EVP. I was going to write about the subject of occult machines or occult devices. So these would have been things throughout modern history, the 20th and 21st century, when people invented machines specifically for occult purposes. So like mind reading machines and, machines to speak to the dead. Scientology, of course, has their famous machine that helps to determine when you've gone clear, when you've removed all the trauma from your body and your mind. So that's what I intended to do this week, was to write that blog post that I've wanted to write for a long time. But I ended up instead writing about the Catholic Church with EVP and EVP. And the reason that happened was because as I started to write the article, the first device that I started writing about was something called the chronovisor. And anyone that's into like super weird stuff, especially super weird Vatican conspiracy stuff, has heard about the chronovisor. It was a supposed time machine type of device that was invented by a Catholic priest and brother named Father Ernetti. And I started to write about the history of Father Ernetti developing the chronovisor and everything that he was doing with it. And I write about that in the blog, so you can read the blog. I'll put the link down in the description so you can read all the details about this. But when I started writing this article, I knew I had heard that name before. Father Ernetti. Where did I hear that name before? And then I started to read that he had been working with another priest, Father Gemelli. And I was like, okay, I know I've heard these names before, but that name, Ernetti. And then it hit me. I had read about Father Ernetti. I've got my radio on, sorry. So that was not Voices of the Dead in the background. If you heard anything, that was whoever the host is in the morning here in WFMT in Chicago. So anyway, I digress. So I had realized that years ago on my blog, on the Chicago Hauntings Tours blog, I had written a blog post about the Vatican and EVP. And the post, I actually asked Mike Huberty, who took over the company, to take the blog post down because I was so ashamed of it. I didn't want anyone to read it, because the whole blog post was me justifying doing EVP research, because 2 former popes had condoned it, and many of the popes were actually friends with or even family members of the some of the greatest EVP researchers in the 20th century. So it was me going like, it's fine. Everyone says like we shouldn't be doing this, but even the popes say it's okay, right? So it's ridiculous. But anyway, but that is where I had heard Father Ernetti's name before, because Father Ernetti and Father Gemelli were 2 of the earliest EVP researchers. Their EVP research started, as everybody's does or used to do, accidentally. They were brilliant men, both of them, brilliant scholars. They all both taught at prestigious universities, Catholic universities. Father Ernetti in particular was just, like a prodigy from his earliest years. And he did a lot of work, his best work, in music, like the science of music. And he and Father Gemelli, Father Gemelli, they were working on a project where they were working on the harmonics of Gregorian chant. And they were using a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and the tape kept jamming. And, as we all do at one point, Father Gemelli was like, he looks up to heaven and goes, "Oh, Father," meaning his dad, "please help me, please help me." So they play they do the recording, they play it back, and lo and behold, there's a voice that is on the tape responding to, it seems, Father Gemelli's plea to his father for help. And the voice says, I'm here. I'm always here. Then, of course, being scientists, they decided to try to get another voice. So they set up the tape recorder again, and they turned it on, and they played the recording back. And sure enough, the voice was there again. Gemelli said it was his father's voice again. And it said, Zucchini, don't you know I'm right here with you? Zucchini was his father's nickname for him when he was a little boy. And there was no one else that knew about that outside of the family. So, and that's something that happens to a lot of people with spirit communication, that name happens. I'm going to tell you a real quick story here, even though it's sort of off the topic of EVP. It's on the topic of spirit communication. My first experience with a Ouija board was a couple of years after my father passed away. And it was the year after my father passed away. And I was at a friend's house here in the neighborhood in Chicago, and it was her birthday party. And she had a Ouija board that I think her mom had given her for her birthday. And Vicky, if you're watching, this is you. And we were using the kids were using the Ouija board, and I didn't want to use it. I was like the Catholic girl. I was like, I'm not touching this thing, right? And they started to get answers for the Ouija board, and so they put it on top of a Bible, thinking that would make sure that there were no bad spirits coming through the Ouija board. These are the kind of crazy things we do to justify what we're doing. Or we say prayers of protection before we use these devices. Like, really? Okay, so anyway, they were doing the Ouija board, and they knew that my dad had passed away the year before. And one of the girls asked, is Ursula's father here? And the board spelled out, I'm right here. And it's spelled out, I'm right here, Annie. Now, some of you know me well. My first name is Anne. My middle name is Ursula, but I've gone by Ursula since I was like 11 years old. But nobody knew in that room that my real name was Anne. So, let alone that my nickname was Annie, although that's pretty simple to figure out. So it was ostensibly my father coming through saying, I'm right here, Annie. So they also knew that, and this is a crazy story, it's in my upcoming book. Some of you already know this. My dad and his brother were identical twins. And when they were 72 years old, they each died in accidents 6 months apart. My uncle Andrew fell out of a 4th floor window in the summer of 1986. And my dad fell and cracked ribs and punctured a lung and died in both freak accidents. And so they asked, is Ursula's uncle here? And the board spelled out, I'm here to Annabella. Which was his nickname for me. So Annabella was just my uncle's nickname for me. So I was like, I'm out of here. I think I left the party at that point, but I didn't really learn my lesson. Years later, I got into this, which I'll talk to you about in a second. But back to Father Ernetti and Father Gemelli. So they started, in earnest doing research into electronic voice phenomenon, trying to communicate with the deceased using a tape recorder. And so they went down in history as some of the first researchers into electronic voice phenomenon. And of course, they're both Catholic, right? Well, they were very disturbed by the fact that they were getting these voices, and they knew that it was deeply wrong as Catholics for them to be attempting communication with the dead. This is expressly forbidden in many, many parts of the Bible. And they went to the current Pope at the time, Pope Pius. And they said, really disturbed because let us play this for you and tell you what's been happening. The Pope was nonplussed. He thought that it was a natural phenomenon. And it's funny because what he said about this was one of the things that I used to justify what I was doing. And I was clearly selectively registering this and not really admitting what the Pope was saying, because what he said, and you can see the full quote in the blog, What he said was that it seemed to be a natural audio phenomenon, like sound waves, and that he said there was nothing of spiritism in it. So he said he believed that it was not a communication with the dead, that it was some kind of impression or sound phenomenon that they were picking up, maybe some kind of like a voice echo, through time or something like that, or something else. So what the Pope was actually saying, he wasn't condoning spirit communication. He was saying, I think this is just some kind of scientific natural phenomenon, and there's nothing wrong with studying it and try to figure out what it is and how it works. So he was not condoning spiritualism. He was not condoning speaking to the dead, but many researchers like myself have used what he said to justify it. All we took away from it, what he said was, he says EVP is fine. It's not a problem. Okay. So moving on, we went into, later, this was in the 1950s, and we go through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and there are other researchers that are having these kinds of experiences out in the field, including Frederick Jurgensen. And he was recording bird calls one afternoon, like in his backyard, and he starts to get these voices in all different languages, saying all kinds of crazy things. And he became one of the most prolific and influential researchers into EVP. Well, he was actually a good friend of the Pope. And because he had done a documentary about the Pope. Jurgensen was a Swedish filmmaker. He's very popular. And in exchange or in Thanksgiving for, what he had done for the church and making this documentary, Pope Pius made him like a knight of the Order of St. Gregory, I think, which is very prestigious thing for a lay person to be made in the Catholic Church. So they were good friends. And so he was well aware of Jurgensen's recordings. And I was not able to find proof of this, but according to all accounts, the Pope had the same attitude toward Jurgensen's work as he had towards the two priests earlier, that it was fine. It was nothing spiritualistic about it. It was some sort of natural kind of sound phenomenon that was fine to study. As the years went on, it turns out that the Catholic Church and Catholic priests, lay Catholics, and even another pope were some of the key researchers into EVP, including the infamous Constantine Raudeve. Raudeve was a Latvian scholar, and he became the name in electronic voice phenomenon. And it's fun. It's weird. We're going to have Daniel O'Connor on. I was supposed to interview him today, but he's ill. So hopefully next week I'll be able to interview him. And we're definitely going to talk about Constantine Raudeve, because since his death, Raudeve's name has popped up all across a wide spectrum of paranormal activity and reports, including Whitley Strieber, the poster child for the alien contactee movement. He claims that his alien implant was invented by Constantine Raudeve from the grave. So that name came up there. I saw Raudeve's name come up all through different types of EVP experiments, mediumistic experiments, where he comes through in seances, he comes through on ghost boxes, by name, etc. So it's a very strange character. Now, Constantine Raudeve, I didn't even know this, shamefully, was a devout Catholic. And it seems that from everything that I've seen in the research that I've done over the last 2 weeks on this, really constant research, even in the middle of the night, I would wake up and start researching this on my phone. All of these players were devout Catholics, these EVP researchers. And one of the things that they did in their experiments, the big experiments they did, was to bring priests in. And a lot of them were higher ups, like monsignors and bishops. And what they were trying to do is what all of us Catholic paranormal investigators have been trying to do, is to justify what they're doing. They brought these priests and monsignors and bishops in to observe these experiments, observe the recording of these voices, and give their blessing on the work that they were doing. And it's really crazy. I was reading one of the biggest experiments or projects that was done into EVP was done at the famous Pi Laboratories in London, Sound Studios. And it was a project that was organized by the Sunday Mirror newspaper, big newspaper in London. It was the editor that had organized it. And he sent a reporter out. They funded the project. And there were a lot of Catholic lay people involved in this, investigators, including Gebhard Fry, who was a university professor at Cambridge, I believe, and he was a devout Catholic. And he scoffed at when his publisher, Colin Smythe, approached him and said, we're going to do this experiment into EVP, because he had been impressed by the work that Constantine Raudeve, fellow, another Catholic, was doing. And Fry said, no, this is ridiculous. It's impossible. It's ridiculous for spirits to communicate with the living. And as a Catholic, he didn't want to be involved in it. But then Colin Smythe decided that he was going to do some of these experiments himself. And when he started to get results, he wanted to show Gebhard Fry what he had gotten. And Gebhard Fry was so impressed that he ended up writing a book himself about these voices of unknown origin. And he was part of these experiments at the Pi Laboratories, as was Smythe and Raudeve, and many priests, monsignors, bishops. And it was really crazy because the quotes that I saw about what some of these higher ups in the Catholic Church, I mean, these are priests, monsignors, right? And they were saying really crazy things. For example, there was one monsignor, I believe it was, and this is all in the blog, all the details. He said that the facts, meaning, the facts of this experiment, the evidence that has been collected by these experiments, shows me that there is another level or dimension between our human life here on earth and our life in heaven with God. And I was like, yeah. Obviously, the Catholic Church has long held the belief in purgatory, the place where many, or probably most, souls go for a period of time after their bodily death. And here this Monsignor completely forgot he was so impressed by the evidence collected in these EVP experiments, he completely forgot his own faith, long held faith, and the church's long held faith in this realm. So that was very strange. And I mean, it was really crazy. And there were many other statements like that from lay Catholics and ordained Catholic priests and bishops and monsignors that were saying things as if they'd never considered before that there was life after death. It was very, very odd. I will say, yeah, the phenomenon is very stunning at times. It's very stunning. I got to be extremely good at collecting EVP. I believe this is no accident. I think the more you do it, the more talent the devil gives you at doing it. And it's also, I've definitely observed that whenever I was around a psychic medium, practicing medium, and I was trying to collect EVP, that I would get much clearer voices, more frequent voices, and longer sentences. And I told several medium friends of mine that this was the case. And it was definitely true. Absolutely true. No doubt about it. At any rate, I was turning this all over in my head, and I was trying to understand how this could be that all of these, high-ranking Catholic priests and devout Catholic lay people could have just gone head over heels for what is without a doubt spirit communication that is expressly prohibited by every level of the Christian faith. And I started to think about history, and I thought, these men had all witnessed the world wars. They had seen what these human devices could do, the atom bomb, the other weapons of war, World War I and World War II. They had seen, the advent of radio, a lot of them, and television later. And then later on, they've seen men walk on the moon. They'd seen computers go from room size to desk size in a matter of years. This certainly must have been, this idea that you could record the voices of the dead on tape must have seemed to them just like the next thing, part of this entire new world of that was opening up through human invention. So, and I realized that that was something that I felt very strongly too, which I'll talk more about in a second. The other thing I realized about them was that in keeping with all of that, that modern attitude and that modern opening in the 20th century was the great lessening of the awareness of this. And of course, the war, the actual physical, observable wars that many of these men actually participated in. That idea, the truth that we know of, that great spiritual, invisible war that's been raging for thousands of years, since the beginning of the world, that was always front and center in the Catholic Church. But with those world wars that were observable, that cut to the heart of these men, of course, that spiritual war fell to the background. It began to take a back seat, as did, of course, later on, belief in the devil and belief in evil spirits and all that. So I realized there were these two big movements that were going on at the same time in, the intellectual and academic world and theological world as well. And something else I remembered from another book I've been working on, the Devil in Dreamland book about the UFO phenomenon, was that, by the 20th century, millions of people all over the world were familiar with the idea of trying to communicate with spirits from the spiritualist movement that was almost eclipsed Christianity in the 19th century. This was just like a pastime that people would do, was to have seances, and it became so separate from religion and Christianity. And there was Christianity that was very much a part of the spiritualist movement. So these people were Christians for the most part. And of course, a lot of them, like, that really got deep into theosophy and all of that, got into Eastern religions and everything else, and aliens, extraterrestrials. But for the most part, spiritualists were Christians. A lot of them were even, Anglican priests and things like that. So there were these three things going on. So, that idea that spirit communication was evil and should not be practiced, the edge had been taken off that tremendously during the spiritualist movement. And then with the world wars, you had not only, that the attention turned to the real, visible war, away from the invisible spiritual war. And then you also had just the explosion of devices and inventions that had so greatly changed the world. And everybody was all in and on board, even the popes, of course. And we see that too. My big example now is Pope Francis, who is the exact same way. We see the same thing, that Pope Francis is all in with the UFO thing and all the Vatican scientists. And I don't know, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe, he's in with the climate change, he's in with the UFOs, he's in with, the Eastern religions, everything. So maybe he's just in with the whole cultural current, being on board with aliens, no problem with aliens. I'm not supposed to listen to or watch Sedevacantists. If you're not Catholic, a Sedevacantist is someone who doesn't believe that we've had a valid pope since Vatican II. They don't think Vatican II was a valid council, so we haven't had a pope since before Vatican II. But of course, Sedevacantists are very traditionalist, and as a traditionalist Catholic, I think the stuff they say is really smart, and it's my dirty little secret that I listen to like Brother Peter Diamond at the Monastery of the Holy Family, who is a very controversial figure, but he's very, very smart and a very great debater and everything like that. And he just says, I watched a documentary that he made at the monastery about the alien question, and he just said point blank, Pope Francis and the liberal Jesuits of the Vatican just say all kinds of heretical, crazy things, and he's right. He's totally right. And it was funny because it was Brother Diamond, even though, he's in schism with the church, it was that really started me thinking about all of that justification that I had done over the years for the use of EVP, the practice of electronic voice phenomena research. I was using what the popes had said about it, what Pius had said about it, what Pope Paul VI had said about it, and what these Catholic researchers, they had gotten the blessing for it from many priests and monsignors and bishops and the Pope and two popes, at least. And I realized, it was a tough moment for me. And this was a few years ago now, maybe 4 years ago now, that I realized, man, I can't just like take what the Pope says at face value. Of course, we know that the Pope, when he speaks of cathedra, when he rules on something that's infallible, which is extremely rare, that is God's truth. But other than that, all bets are off. He's just a guy, and sometimes he's smart, and sometimes he's very not smart, and sometimes they mislead us on purpose, obviously, the really bad ones. So it was hard for me, but I really had to look at what I was doing and realize that I cannot justify what I'm doing just because the Pope said it's okay. This is wrong, and I have to stop doing it. And it was a very difficult day for me when I realized I had to give up EVP research. Now, let me just go back for 1 second. I'm almost done. But I wanted to just say, the use of recorders in EVP research or in paranormal research, parapsychology, is not in itself an evil thing or a bad thing or a unchristian thing. In fact, it's necessary. When I started out as a paranormal researcher in the 1980s, that was not, speaking with spirits had nothing to do with what we were doing at all. We were scientists. We were observing the environment, collecting evidence from the environment. We weren't interacting with the environment. We weren't trying to bait the spirits like so many people do today with toys and objects, trigger objects. We certainly weren't trying to tape record messages from them, and we weren't trying to certainly not have two-way real-time communications with them. So it was a very different world, and it was only with the advent of the explosion in hobby ghost hunting after 2000 that communicating with the dead, especially two-way real-time communication with the dead, became such an obsession for so many millions of people. Before that, it just wasn't a thing. I mean, of course, you had paranormal investigators like, Lorraine Warren, who was a light trance medium, I think she called herself. Whether that was, I mean, I don't think it was good that she was using those abilities. That we're not supposed to use those abilities if we have them. But at any rate, my point is that some researchers did use some kind of a medium, whether it was a human medium or something. It was only a human medium at that time. We didn't have these other tools yet. But then you had Hans Holzer, who famously, the Holzer method involved him going in as a scientist, but he always worked with a medium going into his investigations. But we just didn't use mediums when we did our research. We were doing, just scientific research, and we did not use mediums. And today, mediums include not only human psychic mediums, but all of these other tools that have been either hacked or invented to communicate with spirits. And these include things like, of course, all kinds of digital recorders that people use now, ghost boxes or spirit boxes. These are radios that have been either hacked or built to constantly scan through one or two of the radio bands very quickly, so that the theory is that the spirits are provided sound bites to work with to make words to speak to us. I had a pile of these ghost boxes. I had a pile of these recorders. I had all kinds of little radios that had been hacked to work this way. I also had dozens of dowsing rods. We would use dowsing rods to try and communicate with the spirits with yes and no answers, asking them to cross or uncross the rods. And when I realized what I had been doing, I piled all this stuff up and I burned it all. And I think that's what everybody should do, definitely. And it was crazy because a lot of this stuff is very expensive equipment, hundreds or thousands of dollars in equipment. And even the books that are written about this, some of them are worth hundreds or thousands of dollars because they're so rare. It was a very limited audience in the beginning. So it was hard to burn all this stuff, but that's what I had to do. And I did it, and I got all of that stuff out, and my life has been so much better since then. But for any paranormal investigator, this is rough because all of these mediums, getting rid of all of these mediums, the tape recorders, the dowsing rods, the ghost boxes, the Ouija boards, all of these mediums that we use to communicate, to bridge that gap between the living and the dead. It's one thing to burn those things, but I had like half my friends were mediums or psychics or clairvoyants. And what do you do? And it's been really awkward and really hard. I pretty much have done nothing. I really haven't addressed this subject to my friends who are mediums, except my one dear friend. Yesterday, we had a text conversation at 7 o'clock in the morning, starting to talk about it. And she said she still loves me. I'm so glad because I love her so much. But what do you do? I mean, it's always so hard, when but we're called as Christians to not only stop doing these things, but to try and show the light to others that are practicing them. So it's been rough. It's been really rough. And certainly, my work has been a lot less popular to people that are hobby ghost hunters, more popular to Catholics and Christians, and more popular to academic parapsychologists, people interested in that kind of academic work. But for hobby ghost hunters who just love EVP, and I get it because I loved collecting EVP. It's, me sitting here saying don't do EVP anymore. It's not a popular position, to put it mildly. When EVP started to get really popular, I didn't want any part of it. I thought it was really scary. I thought it was really weird. I thought it was wrong. And what changed my mind was that when we had our first Chicago Ghost Conference in 2007, our headline speaker was a man named Mark Macy, really smart guy. He was an atheist who came to believe in God through ITC, research instrumental transcommunication. And he had many friends all over the world that were very successful with ITC experimentation. And it was, I sat there in the conference in the Congress Hotel downtown in the ballroom, and I was listening to Mark Macy. And by the time it was finished, I was so enthralled by what he was saying, as was everyone in the room. You could hear a pin drop. He's a really charismatic person. I went home and I dug out my old cassette recorder from the basement, those ones we used to use in school. And you could still get cassette tapes at Walgreens. I walked across the street and got a pack of cassette tapes. And what changed my mind was that Mark said that we're not trying to communicate with spirits like at haunted places. Like, this is not something that you would do. Like, you would go into a haunted place and try to talk to the spirits there with a recorder. He said what the movement was trying to do was to build a bridge between the living and the dead. And to do this, it's like this community of force, like all over the world, right? It's like kind of like a channeling thing. So like every day at a certain time, I would take my tape recorder and set it up in the same place in my apartment for the same amount of time. And I would just run the tape recorder and ask questions. Right. And I did that for weeks before I got my first response. And then it just got more and more frequent, and more words, sentences, different voices, and things like that. And so it's a very different kind of thing, still totally wrong, but maybe even more wrong. I don't know. That's a theological question, I guess. But for another day. But that's what changed my mind, was as I felt like I wasn't trying to talk to, the spirits in haunted houses. I was trying to help build this bridge. And it seemed so much like science. You know what I mean? It seemed like it was a really scientific thing. And when you really talk to people into EVP, there's all kinds of detailed things with engineering and building stuff and all kinds of complicated stuff that makes it seem legit, and not what it actually is, which it's spirit communication and it's occult and it's totally forbidden. And it reminds me too, right now, this is one of my other occult machines, was the radionics devices, the wishing machine that I bought a few years ago. That was a radionics device. And when I pried it open, inside there was sacred geometry drawn on a piece of paper, and there were a bunch of crystals wired together. It's just totally occult. It's witchcraft. And we put these modern spins on it, these modern faces on it. So, you have this snazzy looking radio, that sounds cool and looks cool. And, only a few people know how to put it together because, they're really smart in building stuff like this. But it's necromancy. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter how sleek the ghost box looks or how sleek the recorder looks. That's all it is. And it doesn't matter, if there's high ranking priests or bishops or even the Pope saying it's okay to do it. It's not okay to do it. I hope that you have enjoyed this little look at the Catholic roots of the EVP research movement. And I hope that you'll read the whole blog. It's got a lot more detail than what I've talked about here. And it also has all those quotes from different people that I mentioned, the priest and the Pope, etc. It also has the whole newspaper article that was reported in the Vatican Observer by the priest that was on staff there. And he, was a right-hand man to the Pope at the time. I think it was Pope Paul VI. No, it was more recent than that. I think it was in 1997. So that would have been Pope Jean Paul. Yes. JP2. And this high-ranking priest of the Vatican talked to the newspapers, and it said that the Vatican is no longer going to forbid communication with the deceased. And he went on to talk about what he meant. And what he meant was that sometimes our loved ones will be present with us here on earth. And he didn't even mention that usually it's to ask for prayers, while they're in purgatory. But he said sometimes they will want to comfort us or kind of encourage us to make some kind of a decision in the right way, to choose a good thing rather than the bad thing. But the way, and I found this, and I know a lot of Catholics have found this in the last few decades, the things that come out of the Vatican are often misleading. They're inarticulate or misleading, or maybe even directly misleading or incomplete. And so what this priest was trying to say was to re-emphasize the long-held Catholic belief in the souls in purgatory that sometimes are around us, and the great communion of saints, the fact that we are a great family with these saints that have gone before us and that are now in heaven, and we have relationships with them. We talk to them, we ask them to pray for us and pray with us. That's what he was trying to say. And that, like, it's not necessarily a demonic thing if there seems to be another presence around. But again, myself, I know that I took off like a shot after I read that article, and it spread like wildfire through the EVP community as a rubber stamp on all kinds of spirit communication efforts. And it wasn't meant to be, and it's not. But man, I tell you, yeah, selective hearing. I used that as a title in the blog, and boy, I sure had selective hearing when I was hearing these messages from the popes, and I only and priests, and seeing only what I wanted to see, and also not using common sense and my own knowledge of the faith to realize that sometimes what they were saying was just downright not true and against the faith. So I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about EVP, and I've learned a lot about what it means to be Catholic and what it means to follow the faith and who we can and cannot rely on. And he's got to go back to the Bible, go back to the Word of God to make sure everything is on the up and up. And I definitely do that now. So I will hope you will read the blog. The link is down in the description. And I was going to include some EVP samples that I have taken, that I took, in my past life, not past life, but, past experience. And my former self, as my book is titled, Shadows of My Former Self. But I decided not to do that. I don't want to promulgate, or keep passing this stuff on. Anyone that wants to find samples of electronic voice phenomena, it's all over the internet, YouTube, and everything else. So I don't really want to be a part of that. I also deleted, I think, the majority. At least I tried to. I know I didn't get everything, but I tried to. When I had to delete files from my old computer, that was the first thing that went. And I know I just blanketly deleted thousands and thousands and thousands of them. Just one last thing. This is not to say that the souls of our loved ones do not speak to us. They do speak to us. And this is not to say that some of these voices are not the voices of our loved ones. It's definitely, possible that if they are here with us, and I do believe they sometimes are, the holy souls in purgatory, waiting for our prayers and us feeling their presence and being encouraged or motivated to do that, by some sense, um, and maybe, and I do think there could be some scientific, naturalistic phenomenon whereby our tools pick up those voices sometimes. Good piece of evidence for this is the fact that for, oh my gosh, those 10 years that I was way into EVP research, I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of EVP clips that I recorded said, help me, help us. And that was without a doubt 90% or more of the EVP collected is voices saying help. And it gets to a point where you don't even hear them anymore. You just like, oh, it's someone saying help, and you don't even think about it. And that's one of the most painful things for me, is all those years that I heard what might have been voices asking for help, for prayers to be released from purgatory. I never once prayed for any one of these souls at these haunted places, or, the voices I'd collected on my recorder at home. And I know some of you were here when I had Father Anthony Gramlich on here earlier this year from the National Shrine of the Divine Mercy, talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe. And at the end of the video, we started to talk about, the fact that I feel so terribly about this, that I didn't pray for all those souls. And Father Anthony said that now each day I can ask my guardian angel to please collect, the names of all of those places and all of those ostensibly ghosts, that I was investigating all of those years, and collect all those names together for me, all those places together for me, and my prayers I want to be for them. So that was really cool. And Father Anthony also said he felt that it was a charism, kind of like a blessing, or like a calling that a person has. We'll say they have a special charism. Like, for example, I love to have like people over and cook for them. So like hospitality would be a charism that I have. And he believed that I have a charism for, the holy souls, bringing prayers to the holy souls, which was really cool, because he had no idea that I had started the Pray for Ghosts project at that point, and I told him about it. So that was pretty cool, because it took me a while, but I finally found that it seemed God was calling me to pray for the holy souls and call other people to pray for the holy souls, and definitely to try and convince people to stop trying to speak to the dead. However, so anyway, thanks for being here. I hope you like this video. Please like it, subscribe it, share it, put your comments down below. I know there's going to be some doozies. Put them down below, and come back here next week for the next episode of This Present Darkness, where I hope we'll have Daniel O'Connor on, or we'll have something good anyway. And I'll see you a little bit later on this week, over the weekend, I think, because I'm going to talk about inappropriate advent calendars, which you don't want to miss. So yeah, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you back next time. Until then, remember to pray for ghosts. I'm Ursula Bielski.
Thanks for listening to This Present Darkness. The video version of this podcast is available on Ursula Bielski's World of the Supernatural YouTube channel. Be sure to become a subscriber by signing up with Buzzsprout today. And remember to sign up for the World of the Supernatural mailing list at worldofthesupernatural.com for our monthly newsletter and more. And don't forget to support the podcast through Patreon.